Hey, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co, and today we're doing a Should You Back It on Gloomhaven Grand Festival over on BackIt. We're going to be covering the campaign, but possibly a little different than my usual Should You Back It format, just because of how much there is to actually cover on this campaign. There's a lot of stuff to cover. I already did a video covering the campaign live as it launched, and I meant to have this one out a few days ago, but, you know, better late than never, or at least better before the campaign ends, and the campaign does end in 9 hours. Although before we dive into any of this, just giant disclaimer over here, I do work for GameFound. While I've been doing these crowdfunding videos for over 3 years now, I do currently work for GameFound since August, and take that into account because obviously BackIt as a competing platform, some degree of bias to the things I'm going to say throughout this video. Just make sure you walk in informed and hopefully you watch my content long enough that you, well, trust me as I say things. But with that said, let's go ahead and dive into this. This is Gloomhaven Grand Festival. $4.7 million raised, may well cross $5 million in those next 9 hours, 32,000 backers, both a massive success on the one hand and possibly a massive failure on the other, although not necessarily. My own personal predictions for this campaign were 5 million. 5 minutes before this campaign launched, somebody asked me how much I think it was going to do, and I said 5 million, then I hedged it as 5 to 8 because I was wondering if I was being too pessimistic. And again, going back to that whole BackIt versus GameFound thing, I don't even think that's most of that difference of where this campaign is at 5 million versus Frosthaven, which did $13 million, $12.9 million, and 82,000 backers. Most of that disconnect, I do not think is from BackIt. I think there's a larger conversation around the state of crowdfunding, around what this campaign is offering, around who this campaign is for, and what this represents. And again, I do think ultimately this campaign is a good thing for Cephalosphere and is a good thing for the continuation of the brand, but I didn't think it was ever going to be the massive success that Frosthaven was. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into some generalities so you understand what's going on, talking about the campaign, talking about what's being offered, showing the pledge levels, talking about which ones I think are good back, which ones aren't, also disclaiming the fact that I massively called Frosthaven wrong. Frosthaven was on Kickstarter and I was talking about the campaign, I was like, just wait for retail, it'll be cheaper. The problem is the MSRP of the campaign doubled throughout the course of development, and so I was definitely wrong about that one. That can happen, and it's worth reminding you that as I go through this. But with this, what is Gloomhaven Grand Festival? Gloomhaven was for a long time the #1 rated game on Board Game Geek. It was a massive dungeon crawler with hundreds of hours of content, an expensive game that gave you so much content for what it cost. Comparatively speaking, the cost per play for people who bought Gloomhaven was tremendously low as you spent hundreds of hours in a game system that, yes, it was expensive, but it gave you so much gameplay to dive into across those 50 to 100 scenarios you'd play through as you dove into it, with the possibility of replaying it as well. Dive back into, you know, Forgotten Circles, dive into Jaws of the Lion, then possibly dive into Frosthaven as well. It is a massive dungeon crawler. It is D&D in a box. There's a lot going on in what Gloomhaven is. And then from there, they launched Frosthaven. Frosthaven launched over on Kickstarter, did tremendously well. It was the follow-up, it's the spiritual successor to Gloomhaven, giving you more content, giving you world building and all that as you went through it. And this campaign is a little bit of everything. And when I say a little bit of everything, I mean a little bit of everything. To start with, we have Gloomhaven 2nd Edition. You know how I don't want to go in order of the campaign? Let's go ahead and let's talk about, let's go in order of the pledge levels. Let's scroll into the pledge levels here because there's only so much we can really cover here because there's so much going on. To start with, there's the $1 pledge over here, which is just, go ahead, jump it in, ask the pledge manager, all of those things. Then there's the Buttons and Bugs campaign over here. The Buttons and Bugs was a mid-campaign edition, a mid-campaign add-on that they have sold a tremendous amount, and I can understand why. It's Gloomhaven in a portable box. This is Gloomhaven as a solo campaign for you to dive into. Not really a campaign, solo adventures, a solo experience you can dive into, playing it in 20 minutes. It fits on an airline tray table, and this is the follow-up to Gloomhaven, which was a fan-made expansion of the Gloomhaven universe that was meant to encapsulate what Gloomhaven did, literally in a handful of cards. And they said, we think we can make it a drop better if we take it a step above a handful of cards and into an actual Gloomhaven in a box. It is a small box, as you can see from that hand on the screen over there, and it's going to cost you $15 against a $20 MSRP. It's worth noting, I'm going to intersperse how I actually cover things as opposed to having a campaign coverage and should you back it. I'll talk about things as I go through it. And it's worth saying that currently Buttons and Bugs can only be bought with its own dedicated shipping of $7. Effectively meaning you'll be paying $22 for a game that has an MSRP of $20, and assuming that MSRP holds on down the road, that means you are definitely overpaying for this game. The definitely is depending on whether that MSRP changes. But a $20 MSRP means this will cost you somewhere between $14 to $16 on your online game store down the road, ideally with free shipping if you bundle in a larger order. And so unless you would buy it on its own anyways, or unless you just want it earlier, because one of the benefits of getting this now is you lock in getting it earlier and not having to worry about which retailer has it, how fast it sells out. And so for the extra few dollars you're paying, it may well be worth it to you to pay that $22 for a game that will cost you $15, $16 down the road. And so that's up to you. I think you are paying more for it, but you are guaranteeing early access. I might go ahead and get that one just so I can have early coverage of the game. I might pay that extra $7 just to jump into that one myself, but yes, I will be overpaying effectively to get early access to that game. And that's what Buttons and Bugs is, which is one of the larger additions they've added to the campaign. Smaller in terms of the box size, but larger in terms of what it's done for the campaign. The campaign definitely saw a large boost from the thousands and thousands of people who have jumped on just to buy an accessible, portable, beautiful looking version of Gloomhaven in a small little box. Then we have $30 for the Gloomhaven RPG core book over here. This is coming from $40 MSRP because the next thing that this campaign does, the second thing it officially announced, the way back when this campaign was first announced, I think over a year ago, the main announcement was that they're bringing Gloomhaven miniatures to your table. And we haven't gotten into the Gloomhaven miniatures yet, but since then they've added so many things to the campaign. This campaign is around Gloomhaven miniatures. It's around Gloomhaven 2nd Edition. It's around Gloomhaven RPG. It's around Frosthaven reprint. It's around the Buttons and Bugs. It's around all the peripheral accessories that are being added to your Gloomhaven and or Frosthaven campaign. There's like 6 different things being thrown into this, and a whole lot more if you branch down to individual products, but I would say 6 general things. Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, Frosthaven reprint, Buttons and Bugs, Gloomhaven miniatures, Gloomhaven RPG, and assorted extras and accessories that weren't otherwise available. For example, bringing you the opportunity to play Frosthaven with the flipbook system from Jaws of the Lion, so giving you that larger accessibility, and I believe they said they have plans to doing the same to Gloomhaven as well, although it's not currently available to jump in on. And we're going to want to take into account shipping timelines as well. We'll get to all of that as well. There's 6 different offerings, and Gloomhaven RPG was the second one that was announced. I believe this was announced at PAX Unplugged last year, if I'm not mistaken, but the Gloomhaven RPG system, bringing the controlled chaos of Gloomhaven as opposed to the random dice rolling of an RPG system, using modifier cards, and using the Gloomhaven world building and the Gloomhaven characters to be able to build out your classes within whatever framework. You no longer have to be a specific, quadrille tinkerer. Is the quadrille tinkerer? Quadrille, I think the tinkerer is a quadrille. But now you can be a quadrille, I don't know, not brute, thug. What do they call, not thug, what do they call, what did they rename the brute to? Or did they rename the brute? I think they renamed the brute to something else. The bruiser. You can be a quadrille bruiser as you go through the campaign. You can build out your own class using their lore, using their history, using their adventure guide system. This is going to be the Gloomhaven RPG core book for $30 against the $40 MSRP. Again, throughout this, take into account that generally a final price point in your general online retail store is going to be around the range of, 65 to 80% of the MSRP. Meaning a $40 MSRP, generally you might see somewhere in the range of a $32 price point, $32 for online. Over here you're getting $30, which is cheaper, but you will have to factor in shipping as well. That's going to be true across the board as we go through all these things, factoring those MSRP discounts, which are definitely present, but how much you're paying for shipping and where that ends you up if your goal is to, get the cheapest possible option. And then you also have to factor in sales, which will definitely be present. Gloomhaven is a game that has frequently been, priced one way and then frequently goes on sale for $110, $120 on Amazon, even as low as $100 sometime, and you have to factor that in as you go through these. What is your prime motivator? Getting these things as fast as possible, or getting them for the best possible price point at some point down the road? The RPG Deluxe box set over here is taking you the RPG, but with a whole lot more. Bringing you the Gloomhaven RPG rulebook, 16 class ability card decks, the class modifier decks, 8 extra ability cards. This is giving you absolutely everything you need for the RPG, bringing it to the next level. And then from there we go on to the next thing, which is the most recent announcement. I guess Buttons and Bugs is the most recent announcement. One of the more recent announcements before the campaign launched was the announcement of Gloomhaven 2nd Edition. Gloomhaven is 2nd Edition over here, which gives you a copy of Gloomhaven, well, the new version of Gloomhaven, which they've tweaked and adjusted. They've tweaked the classes, they've adjusted the story, they've made the various influence tracks and the way those work to drive you towards different endings different. They've given you new miniatures, they give you a new art on the tiles, a ton of new things within Gloomhaven, basically taking a game that was the #1 game on Board Game Geek for years, and then basically saying, how can we make it better so that the next generation of players should dive into the system so that they have the best possible experience, which is something that I am very for that. There's been definitely a degree of, not necessarily upheaval, but frustration or pushback against the nature of having a 2nd edition on people who bought the game, and I'm for having a 2nd edition. I'm for taking a product that has been around for this long and trying to tweak it and improve it to give it the best version possible. We've seen this with Arkham Horror having 3 editions. We've seen Twilight Imperium having 4 editions. We've seen other game systems having multiple editions. Machina Arcana had 3 editions. Lots of game systems will take a game that is well loved and tweak it to constantly give you the best possible experience. That does not take away from the frustration around those who just bought it. Anyone could have bought Gloomhaven, a month before they announced this, and then sitting there with a new game that they're like, this is no longer the new shiny thing I thought it was. It feels like it's now the lesser version. That is a inherent cost to when you improve the product. Whenever you improve something, there's a cost to that frustration around someone who just bought it, which I completely respect and am sympathetic to. I don't think that takes away from how good your own individual game that you just bought is. It was #1 on Boarding Geek for years for a reason, and I don't think it means that we shouldn't improve things for the next generation of gamers who dive into Gloomhaven and possibly have an improved and better experience because of those tweaks. So I'm happy this exists, and I acknowledge the frustration around it. And also, it's going to cost you $130, down from the $180 MSRP, which is a good price point. Shipping will obviously be a factor. This is a big box you have to take into account. And getting this on sale might be a factor as well. And also, as with Frosthaven, as I said already, Frosthaven jumped in the MSRP. The predicted MSRP of the game, when it is on Kickstarter, jumped heavily. And if any of those things happen to any of these games, to Buttons and Bugs, to the Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, to the miniature line, if any of the MSRPs jump, the predictions as whether you should get it now, whether you get it down the road, those will obviously adjust around the nature of MSRPs. They don't usually fluctuate that much, but things can change and things do change, and so take that into account as we go through this. But overall, if you want Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, if you're willing to wait for it, this is likely a way to jump in on this right now and see, or alternatively, you can just wait till it shows up at retail and see if it's something you're still interested in at the time. In general, many of these things, I would say unless you feel the need for it now or you're factoring the difference, again, Buttons and Bugs for only a few dollars more, it's like, okay, great, I'll get it first, I don't have to hunt it down, it's not that much money. But this Gloomhaven 2nd Edition will be available. You'll be able to get your hands in it. And trying to predict right now how interested you are in a $130 game plus shipping versus how interested you'll be in that same thing a year and a half from now for that possible savings or possibly costing you more, going either way, I would say there's less of an incentive to back that, just given the price point and given you knowing where you're going to be a year from now when this possibly shows up then. Then we have the Miniatures of Gloomhaven base set. This was the first thing that sparked this campaign. The idea that Gloomhaven, a game that was never going to have miniatures, finally has miniatures. And the biggest thing I'll say around this is factor in not the cost, but factor in whether you're going to use and benefit from this, whether you're going to table this, how much do you like Gloomhaven, and are you willing to have giant boxes full of miniatures that you have to find the right miniatures for your campaign and setup. Lord knows I love Gloomhaven. I think it's a fantastic game. It was my #3 game of all time last year. I don't think it's going to be quite as high this year. I think the more I've played it, it has gone down, but it's certainly going to be in my top 100. I think Gloomhaven is a fantastic universe, a fantastic game, and there's so much depth to the experience, and I'm excited to see them continue to expand and grow the system, to add more to it, to branch down to RPGs, to add miniatures. I'm excited for what they are doing here, to add the flip books. I think the flip books are gold, but it doesn't mean that it's not without its flaws. And for me personally, one of the biggest flaws of Gloomhaven is how much setup time there is on the table. One of the reasons I highly recommend the digital adaptation, which I think gives you the world of Gloomhaven, but with less setup time, with pros and cons added to it as well, make no mistake. But the setup of Gloomhaven to me is the biggest con, and miniatures, much as I love them, this will certainly add to your setup time. You should make sure you know you want this before you dive into this. I'm not saying it's not for you, I'm not in the slightest. I think it looks very cool. I think the miniatures, the sculpting I'm not 100% sold on. Some I like, some not so much. I've never really thought that Gloomhaven was top of the line when it came to sculpts. I think they're top of the line when it comes to the breadth and scope of what they've done, make no mistake. But miniature sculpts, I think there are other companies that do them better. But I do think these do look pretty good. To me, my biggest concern is just, will it add to the table time, and will I actually play this or not, and will you actually play this or not if you're jumping in it? Although you are getting 259 miniatures for $130, which at 50 cents a miniature is a good price point comparatively speaking. Then we have $180 for Frosthaven, coming out from a $250 MSRP. This the new printing of the highly acclaimed sequel to Gloomhaven, which basically brings you Gloomhaven and then some. Gloomhaven with an outpost phase where you're building the world around you. It takes all the things that Gloomhaven did well and adds more depth to the experience, more characters, more classes, more enemies, more of everything, but building on that same core system. If you like Gloomhaven, you will likely like Frosthaven. If you haven't played Frosthaven or Gloomhaven, I'd recommend starting with Jaws of the Lion. Not even any of these, but start with Jaws of the Lion. Don't even start with Gloomhaven. Find the most accessible entry point to this, or the digital game instead. Find the most accessible entryway to this game series. Don't dive in at Frosthaven unless you've played the rest, in which case it's not an entry point. Don't dive in at Frosthaven if you haven't played the rest. It's an expensive game, and it gives you a lot, and it gives a lot of reasons why this is a great game, why this is well loved, well wanted, and there's going to be around. It's going to be around for a long time, but it doesn't mean it should be your first entry point to this series. At $325, we have a total of 603 miniatures. Again, keeping close to that 50 cents per miniature, but being a drop above it as you branch into these other packs. This gives you the full set of Gloomhaven, of Frosthaven, of Jaws of the Lion, of Forgotten Circles, bringing you everything for the Gloomhaven universe. Then we have the Ultimate Gloomhaven set, bringing you 259 miniatures and Gloomhaven 2nd Edition all together in a single box over here for $350, putting you exactly what you need over there, as well as Gloomhaven Foreteller, which I highly recommend Foreteller in general. I think Foreteller heavily enhances your gaming experience, will add background music, will add, narration, will add a whole lot to improve your gaming experience. I'm a huge fan of Foreteller, and I generally strongly recommend it in general. Just it'll in whatever game system that you have, if you can try Foreteller out, see if it's for you. I also do recommend playing it not just from your phone, but from an actual speaker system, which will further enhance your immersion. For $550, we have a total of 603 miniatures, as well as Gloomhaven, as well as... don't think we have Frosthaven for this. We have Gloomhaven 2nd Edition with Foreteller, RPG Deluxe box set. I did not believe it's Frosthaven. There's no Frosthaven. It's Gloomhaven 2nd Edition and all the new stuff, as well as the Foreteller app as well, for 603 miniatures for $550. And then over here, we have a Shopkeeper pledge as well. And then from there, we just move to add-ons. They don't have a giant all-in for absolutely everything. And we have $15 for Buttons and Bugs. We have Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, Gloomhaven 2nd, we have the solo scenarios. We have the 2nd Edition class upgrade kit. This is $75, but it takes your 1st edition and updates all the classes, the rebalancing, the cards, the art, all that stuff around the core system of characters to your 2nd edition. It is almost as much as a full copy. It's $75. You're looking at $130 for a full new copy of 2nd edition, but for those who don't want to deal with selling or this or that, it still may represent a savings and something you're interested in. We have the 2nd edition audio narration from Foreteller for $15. We have a full display insert for $40. We have full display map tile archive for $20. Did I miss the insert for everything else? Nope, not yet. Not yet. We have over here, we have Forgotten Circles for $30. We have Frosthaven for $180. Frosthaven play service books for $50. This is a big deal. These are the books that will make your Frosthaven experience that much easier to table and play. For $50, you'll be able to flip out your books instead of having to deal with actually setting up the scenario tiles. It'll save you a lot of time, effort, and energy. For Frosthaven solo scenarios over here for $10. For $15 for the removal stickers. $15 for Frosthaven Foreteller narration. We have full display insert for $50, and we have full display map tile archive for $20, and $135 for the Laser Ox Monster Tuck Box Organizer. So again, a ton of things being added here. Then we move to the RPG for $30 for the RPG core book, $50 for the complete car set, $9 for everything, $10 for those little the Game Master screen and element trackers, the Gloom Master screen, not the Game Master screen, apologies. We have $30 for the Gloomhaven summons, $135 for the Gloomhaven base set, $25 for the Gloomhaven mercenary set. This is a useful set if you want to take your basic set of Gloomhaven as is and update it to the new characters for the miniatures. If you just want the new miniatures just for 2nd edition, if you have the base set, this will give you those new sculpts and whatever it is for the 2nd edition of Gloomhaven. We have $90 for Frosthaven, we have $30 for the summon sets, we have $25 for Forgotten Circles expansion, $30 for the Jaws of the Lion, and $40 for Army Painter set, Speed Paint. I believe they're Speed Paints, including a new set of Speed Paint colors. I'm not sure if it includes Speed Paint or it's all Speed Paint, but Army Painter set. Army Painter is usually my go-to painting brand. I am not an expert. Do not take that as a testimonial of anything other than the fact that when I have painted infrequently, I usually use Army Painter. And then we have shipping. Shipping with a whole lot of options over here, as well as the shipping timeline. We have $7 for Button Bugs, a whole chart of what goes out, up to $8 for the big one. We have a Gloomhaven, we have Gloomhaven Frosthaven for $30. You have to take that into account. Your $180 Frosthaven is really $210. Your $130 Gloomhaven is really $160. You have to take that into account as you go through things. And then there's a shipping timeline, which is a big deal and a big part of why the 17 reasons of why this campaign may or may not be where it should be. The timeline is an interesting one that you want to factor in because we have Wave 1, Frosthaven enters production. Where do we have shipment over here? We have Wave 2, October 2023, Frosthaven begins to fulfill in October 2023. In November, we have Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs begins fulfillment. In December, we have Gloomhaven 2nd Edition enters production. And then we have fulfillment of March 24 for Gloomhaven 2nd Edition. We have Gloomhaven RPG enters production in April 2024. We have Gloomhaven RPG begins fulfillment in July 2024. And then we have the miniatures in January of 2025. The miniatures begin to fulfill, which will possibly be, what is it? We have Gloomhaven 2nd Edition enters fulfillment in March 2024. So another 7 months or so later is when you possibly get your miniatures, assuming everything is on track. And that's a big part of this as we go through this over here. In general, in this campaign, there's different timelines for different things. There's different timelines for what you're going to get and when. You may get your Frosthaven books, you may get Frosthaven accessories, you may get, your Gloomhaven miniatures a year after you get the game. Because if you want those miniatures, does it help you? If you're someone, this is part of that I'm curious about, if you're someone who's backing the campaign and you want those miniatures, does it help you to have Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, 7 months earlier than you get the miniatures? Because you will have that game. Then you can play it without those expensive miniatures you just bought, or it can be an expensive paperweight for 7 months. Those questions are an interesting part of the way this is being run, and make no mistake, as a $5 million campaign with 32,000 backers, this is an ambitious project and one that there's never going to be a perfect answer for everyone. But inherently there's a disconnect in that timeline of when you're getting every single thing, just because of the very nature of how there's distributing and producing, but when something is or isn't useful to you. And this is where we're going to talk about the nature of the campaign in general, the nature of the campaign, of where it's at, of how it's doing, because Gloomhaven Grand Festival is an ambitious project. The entire thing is hugely ambitious, throwing 6 different kind of categories of Gloomhaven products at you, Gloomhaven and Frosthaven and that world. And I think at $5 million, I think it is both a massive success, and also I have to assume it's under what they were hoping or wanting for this campaign. And I think there are a lot of things that are going on, a few of them partially related to Backkit, but most of them related to just the nature of what this is and who it's for. To start with, there's not a clear focus on the campaign. As much as it's around the world of Gloomhaven, there's not a clear focus of who this campaign is for, who wants what particular product, and I think that while the aggregate of how this campaign has done is better than any one individual campaign on their own, I think had this been 5 or 3 or 4 different campaigns around their focused products, Gloomhaven RPG, Gloomhaven Miniatures, Gloomhaven Frosthaven reprint and accessories, had they narrowed this down to 3 different products, 3 different categories of campaigns, I think the aggregate total across all 3 would be higher. I think focus in crowdfunding is a big deal, and there are some companies that have done a tremendous job navigating that. In particular, Board Game Tables or Allplay, I should say. Allplay is a company that has historically done a tremendously good job of managing to have different products while keeping that core focus as much as possible. And I still don't think they're perfect. I just think they're among the best at being able to offer different games in a single campaign. Most companies struggle with it, and I don't think Gloomhaven here is any exception. I think that the displaced focus makes it unclear who is here for what people are excited for, and that timeline further adds to that breakdown of that disparity of just where things are and what this campaign is for. I also think the crowdfunding space has changed since Frosthaven. I think Frosthaven in general, as ambitious as it was and incredible it was, I think in the past year and a half we've seen delays, we've seen shipping cost more, we've seen people have to deal with possibly not getting their pledges in occasional situations. And I think across the board, whichever platform you're on, whether it's a Kickstarter, whether it's Backkit, whether it's GameFound, I think there's been some degree of downturn as far as, I believe Kickstarter, if I'm not mistaken, is down 12% year over year in their games category, and I think that is a factor in general as far as where people are and how they're spending, how their funding dollars are being spent in this new environment as things change. And so I think there's already that disconnect as well. I think there's some small hiccups on the Backkit side. When the campaign first launched, for the first hour, it was very glitchy, couldn't handle the load. There were too many people coming to the platform for this campaign all at once. Definitely saw some small hiccups. I don't think it's a big factor. I think the pledge train, as a side point, I think the pledge train on Backkit, I think it's a very cool idea, but I think it needs an actual reason behind it. I think there are cool things you could do with Pledge Train, but as it currently stands, I think that Pledge Train within the first few days, one of the things that's interesting about it is, in the first few days, it served only as a reminder of when people had stopped backing the campaign, and if people would cancel, in the first few days, you'd have like, I don't know, 900 backers, and you'd have 1,000 people on Pledge Train, because people had dropped their pledges, but Pledge Train kept that tally of people who had dropped their pledges, and so in a weird way, Pledge Train almost, if anything, served as small reminders of what was going wrong with the campaign, and I think it's a cool feature. I think it needs to be done in different ways. But again, I don't think this is about Backkit. I think this is about the nature of the lack of focus, the disparate timelines, the changed the evolving space. I think Gloomhaven 2nd Edition is also a fascinating one. Gloomhaven 2nd Edition and Frosthaven, which are 2 big components of this campaign. The reprint as well, both reprints effectively, a redone version of Gloomhaven as well as a reprint of Frosthaven. And I think they are interesting in the sense that 2nd Edition, while I think is a very good product to have in the board game space, I think that for most people who are in this campaign, it is likely either a dealing or addressing their FOMO. If you're someone who has Gloomhaven, you want 2nd Edition, but you don't necessarily need it, then that only serves as almost a sore topic for you. I mean, down at the bottom of the campaign, they had this little thing down here. Let's see if we can find this here. Public service. It's important to everyone should treat with respect to this campaign. Insulting and inflammatory language will not be tolerated, and Self-Illustrated Games reserves the right to refuse service to anyone. If you're going to be a jerk, we don't want your money. And as much as I echo that, I think that part of the reason there was this kind of statement and starting off the bat with a degree of like, hey, you got to be careful how you act here, is because people were upset. And I think how you act is important. I think you should always act with respect towards others, 100%. As somebody who has to read every single YouTube comment that shows up here, trust me, I am very empathetic to that call to action. But I think the starting baseline was frustration from people who owned Gloomhaven. People who may have backed Gloomhaven in the last campaign may have only just showed up years late, and now it finally shows up, and they're like, by the way, thanks for backing the campaign, and sorry for the fact that it's a year late, or more than that late, but now we actually go ahead, and now we're going to be launching 2nd Edition as well, and so there is that frustration around the product. I think people who are backing Gloomhaven Second Edition, for the most part, are almost reluctant backers dealing with it with a FOMO, because I think Gloomhaven Second Edition should absolutely exist in the board game space. You should improve a product for all of those who will enter the hobby in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it should exist. But that doesn't mean that the target audience are people who are passionately backing crowdfunding campaigns and spending hundreds of dollars on things that won't show up for a year. That is an entirely different genre of people, and I think that overlap is different. Similarly, Frosthaven, which just landed and just dropped for everyone. I think it's good that they have a reprint. I think it's good that more people can jump in on it, but it has a huge degree of exposure and awareness, and 80,000 copies with Frosthaven were shipped. 80,000 copies that many of them were late, which means it's had an opportunity to enter and circulate around the secondary market already, because from that portion, there's a decent amount of people who don't necessarily need it when it finally does show up. And so I think there's a lot. And then the RPG I saw from a lot of people. The RPG is not as much my following, so I cannot speak as much to this, but I can repeat what I've seen others say. But people who were interested in RPGs, I've seen that the first initial streams were not as necessarily as clear as far as whether this was a good offering that compelled RPG players. Again, I'm not an RPG person. I actually am tentatively interested in the Gloomhaven RPG just because I like the universe. But from people who actually played RPGs, I've seen them be less than impressed with the initial streams. I believe I've seen that some of the latest streams have picked up in terms of the interest or excitement around it, but I don't think it landed with that clear offering. I think in general, the biggest thing is that there wasn't a ton of focus around this campaign. And again, make no mistake, $5 million is not a failure in any way, shape, and form. But I don't think this is ever going to see the $13 million that Frosthaven did. I don't think it was ever going to come close. I think it's not the nature of what this is offering. Frosthaven had a clear target market, had a clear audience. It was building off of the huge success of a prior product and offering you more in that universe. And it did so with a clear focus and a message. This campaign is a little different. This campaign is Gloomhaven Miniatures. It's Gloomhaven RPG. It's Gloomhaven Second Edition. It's a Frosthaven reprint. It's Frosthaven accessories. It's buttons and bugs. Every single few days there's another update as far as the things that are being added or given in this campaign. And that does just make it less of a clear focus as to what it is. Again, not a failure, not by any means. Still a massive success. Just I know that very, very different level of success of what it is compared to the original Frosthaven, which broke crowdfunding records, became the most funded crowdfunding campaign of all time, and I am curious when that will be beaten. I think all I have to do is put out a video saying why Frosthaven will never be out crowdfunded in the tabletop space, and then about a few months later, I'm sure it'll happen. That's just the way it works. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe. I'm sorry for the lateness of the Should You Back It on Gloomhaven, on the Gloomhaven Grand Festival. There's a lot of things here. I think buttons and bugs you're overpaying for, but I might choose to overpay for it as well, just to get it early in, so why not? And I don't mind, Cephalor getting the money directly. I don't mind supporting creators. I think many of the other products over here are a question of how much you want them ASAP versus whether you want to try to save money on them. I think Gloomhaven Second Edition and Frosthaven you will still be able to find cheaper if you're not in a rush for them, but if you just want to lock in early access, then sure, by all means go for it. I think the RPG space and the miniature space are trickier. I don't think those are going to be as widely carried. I think they'll still be carried. They're going to be. They're around massive success, massive line. But I think that those fall more into category, especially if you're going in the all-ins over there. I think the pledge prices on those do seem pretty reasonable. If it's a miniature, the RPGs have seen a little less discount. I think the miniature all-in, if you're getting all that, if it's a miniature for $325 for like 600 plus miniatures, I think that is a good price point and one that I would be wary of the MSRPs adjusting. I'd also be wary of the timeline. January 2025 is a long time from now, and that's assuming things are on track. So I'd say if you're backing the miniatures, or the RPG for that matter, sign up for a long wait. Those timelines are rarely beaten. There are some companies that have managed to beat timelines they've given. Steamforge recently has been on a roll, often beating timelines they've given, but many companies do not beat the timelines. If anything, they are later, and fact that in before you spend a whole lot of money on this campaign. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this helpful. And as always, I hope you have a good one.